Hey y'all, I'm Sunny Shell, and this is Women Atheists UNLOAD on Skeptic Haven. Today we're going to be talking about religious indoctrination of children with Deirdre and Mary. If you want to ask our guest a question, we will answer super chats as quickly as possible during the show. If we have time, we'll answer live chat questions as well. Now let's get going.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that.
Hey everybody, I hope everyone's doing well. Hello Deirdre.
Hello, it's Deirdre, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thank you for correcting me. I apologize for that. And hey, Mary, I'm so glad to have you back.
Hi, it's very nice to talk to you again.
Yes, absolutely. So for those who have not seen either of you, I'll start with Deirdre. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Deirdre, obviously. So I come from a Brethren Mennonite community. It's a conservative Mennonite community. And I left that community, kind of been on my own, did a bunch of research, tried to kind of find my place and like my beliefs in God and that sort of thing, read the Bible, found that wasn't for me, just did a deep dive into it. And as I started kind of healing from like the trauma and that sort of thing from like what I went through in the community, I started really researching stuff so I can help other people within, certain religious organizations and communities with information and trying to get them to understand kind of what's going on. So one of those things that I did was a deep dive into child religious indoctrination, and that's what I'll be speaking about today.
Excellent. We're really glad that you were able to be on the show and that you have such a wealth of knowledge on this subject. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So Mary, for those who don't know you, how about you tell us about you?
Hi. I don't even know what to say. Look, I've already been here, but I was born and raised Amish. I lived in 5 different Amish communities. And I'm here today to support Deirdre in talking about what she found, because she asked me to be here. Because that's one of the things I do is help people whenever they ask me, and I have the capacity to do so.
And I really appreciate that, Mary.
I do
Of
too.
course.
Cindy, yay! I'm so glad you're on.
Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. We were actually having some issues in the back, so we just now got started. So, and I'm so glad that you're here because for some reason I am my words are not coming out right today. So that's okay. We're gonna do this. So our topic again today is child indoctrination, child religious indoctrination. And so let's talk backstage. Deirdre, you had said that there was a difference between, or you wanted to talk to us about what religious indoctrination is and what it is not. So how about we start there?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I think that when we hear the word indoctrination, especially now that it's being used a lot to kind of describe different things, I want to talk about what indoctrination is and what indoctrination isn't. And then I want to talk about specifically what religious indoctrination is. So indoctrination is giving a set of beliefs. So basically what happens when you do indoctrination is you start introducing an ideology or a set of beliefs. And then in that set of beliefs, you generally would tell them that there is something inherently wrong with you. And part of that is the shame and guilt. And then you do fantasy idolism. So you give them information that is basically like a fantasy. So you give them this knowledge of like, you're inherently bad, and that if you believe in this, if you adhere to this certain set of beliefs, there's going to be a reward, and then you kind of introduce things that attribute to an imagination. So there's great stories of like, we'll just use the Bible, for example, giants and that sort of thing. There's a very fantasy base with that. And then the other thing that you do with that is fear. So if you do not believe these set of beliefs that I'm giving to you, that there is going to be a punishment. Something awful is going to happen to you. So within religious indoctrination, basically what that would be is hell. You're going to burn internally forever. Anybody around you that doesn't believe in it is going to burn internally around you, that it's going to be awful. And then you also, a lot of times in the extreme fundamentalist Christians and the Anabaptist communities, they'll also tell them, if you're not committing to these set of beliefs, that there's going to be consequences. You're going to be demonically influenced. You're going to do bad things that you don't want to do. You're going to be tempted. You're going to ruin everybody's life and that sort of thing. And then so basically, that's what indoctrination is. And then within indoctrination, when a child starts questioning things, starts using logic, you'll notice that there'll be terms used such as like faith. You must have faith, and to believe. So basically what you're doing is you're denying reality. And then a lot of times in the fundamentalist Christian organizations, or the extreme organizations where they're really using that religious indoctrination, they will also there will be a lot of science denial. And what happens when you deny science, because there's a logical system within science, you're essentially denying reality, and you're inhibiting that child from adapting the ability to critically think. So they're going to be susceptible to take in things without logic or reason.
Okay, now you said quite a lot. There's a lot to unpack there. So I was kind of taking some notes as you were talking, and so tell me if this is correct. This is what I kind of heard as in a nutshell, is that religious indoctrination uses fantasy plus fear, delivers unrealistic consequences, tacks on shame and guilt.
Yes.
And then they create a system in which reality is denied, including science. But what that does is it prevents logic from being logic, in a sense. And so it's not only that they are going against logic for the religion, it kind of causes, especially within children, to where it goes across everything that they in their life. It's like it what's the word I'm looking for? It kind of, well, you said it inhibits them, so it like inhibits their normal brain functioning.
Yes, and it inhibits their ability to critically think. And one thing that happens, like I said, within the religious indoctrination, is it almost flips reality. So they believe that the fantasy, that these set of beliefs is reality, and they believe reality is not reality.
And part of what I believe Deirdre was trying to convey is this idea, this use of fantasy and fear and shame and all of these tactics. So when you as a child question logic, they use these tactics to do what's called a thought-stopping process. Think about it, because when children question inside of that reality, they then proceed to go and respond with, well, women can't possibly like actually analyze that or comprehend the true meaning of that. You have to rely on men who were chosen by Lot, for example, to tell you what that actually means. Your interpretation of this is wrong. You're the weaker vessel. So they use that to further have this thought-stopping process. So when these children are indoctrinated to believe that, with that process, they proceed to grow up. And when they start questioning things, they tell themselves these things.
Yeah, and good point in that is oftentimes you'll see in this environment where they're being religiously indoctrinated, that when they do start questioning them, they give them they basically give them like kind of a punishment for it. So like, why are you questioning this? Why are you not understanding it? If you have faith, if you have God in your heart, if you truly believe, then you would understand what it's saying. You wouldn't question it. If you don't understand it, it's because you're not filled with the Holy Spirit. They will use examples like that a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Deneen Murphy says, when you question it logically, you are told to believe with the faith of a little child. That's exactly
correct.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
Cindy?
Yeah, I had two points regarding this. This thought-stopping issue is very, very much used in this situation, and when you debate with any theist, you realize that they are trained to give a certain answer to every specific question, and that's the purpose of the thought-stopping motion. It's you don't need to think because you have the answer already prepared for you. And so when you debate, you realize that once you manage to go through that specific answer, the people behind have a lot of trouble thinking by themselves on this very specific question, precisely because that tactics is very, very, very effective. And the second point I wanted to talk about, and I'm putting a link to a study in the chat. There's been two studies, I think it's 2012 or 2014, that show that for children between 5 and 6, the more religion they are taught at this age, the less effective they are at differentiating fiction from reality. So there is peer-reviewed research behind this. It's not just atheists talking and criticizing how theists raise their kids. It's peer-reviewed research, and it shows that if you teach religion to a kid up to 5 or 6 years old, then they will have more trouble to differentiate fiction from reality, whether it's events or characters.
Yep. And I think further the thought-stopping process, okay, the Amish in me is coming out. Further, the thought-stopping process comes out as like another thing where if we do start to question something, then we immediately attack ourselves for it and we gaslight ourselves for questioning it, because it is a very effective technique. And so that makes it even harder to differentiate between fiction and reality.
Right. And one thing that that you said, Cindy, that kind of made me think, you were talking about when you end up getting into a debate with a theist. There's also the thing that they don't understand why we don't agree to it. It's like when they have had this argument, they give us this argument. It's like, but that's what I've been told all my life. Why do you not accept this? And when we say we don't accept it, then they can't. It's almost like it's not. They go into a cognitive dissonance in a sense. It's like, no, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. So it must be that we are the crazy ones, and they will fight really hard against that. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about in all of this.
Yes.
Yeah. Have you heard?
Yeah, and I apologize about that flurry of information all at once. It's my autistic brain. One thing I also want to point out too is a lot of times when you talk to adult Christians, or even when they find out information from you that you're an atheist and that sort of thing, you'll notice that you'll get a reaction a lot of times that they will almost get upset or angry at the fact that you are an atheist or that you don't believe in a God. And that's part of the brainwashing process, is when you are brainwashed, when anything opposes your belief system, it automatically triggers a panic emotion in you, because you're questioning your whole foundation of your belief system that you've been brainwashed into. So it's a trauma response to that, to get upset, to be very angry, and not to understand.
Right. It makes me kind of feel like when we get into a negative argument with a theist, that actually does more harm than good. Because if they are indoctrinated and they are already having a fear response, then arguing in a negative way simply puts them more into what they feel is a safe zone, which is pushing them deeper into the religion. How do you guys think we should then respond to theists when we're talking to them? What is an appropriate or maybe even a helpful way of talking to a theist?
Well, first, it depends on the theist, because what you're describing here is that when the indoctrination starts early, before 6 years old, the entire worldview builds around the belief in God. Instead of when you don't grow in a religious belief, you don't have this core, this foundation on which everything is built. You observe the world, and then you understand how it works based on what you see. But here you have this core, and everything that comes on it has to attach to it somehow. And this thought stopping process is one of the ways those elements are consolidated. If you see something in the world that doesn't correspond to your view, like suffering, for example, why is there suffering when God is benevolent? Then all those responses that are given to you, they use as consolidant to this, and that's one, maybe the major reason why theists feel physically attacked when you attack their belief. It's because you attack their identity, when for you it's just one belief among others, and so we need to understand this first and foremost. The second thing is what's called Morton's demon. I don't know if you heard of it. It's an expression coined by a guy called Morton in the 70s. He was a former creationist, and he used this image that some people have this demon in front of the forehead here, and this demon filters everything that comes in, and everything that goes against the belief is filtered before it comes to the person's ears or eyes, and therefore they not only they have a strong belief because of indoctrination, but also they are not confronted to conflicting data because of this demon. This demon pushes everything away, and so they don't even understand how you can not believe, because they don't have any conflicting knowledge or any conflicting ideas. And that's something else to understand, because if someone is never exposed to an idea, they will have trouble accepting it at first glance, especially if, again, it attacks their core identity. So if we are aware of where the interlocutor we have, where they are located in those two areas, it gets much better and much easier to talk to them.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm curious, Mary, what your response is, because both you and Deirdre were raised from birth, I think, in not just religiosity, but in cult religiosity. And so to me, that seems like it's even more than what Cindy and I are talking about, because we haven't been exposed to that level. So I'm curious what you guys say as well about how we should be talking to people.
So, number one, I highly recommend this book called Combating Cult Mind Control. If you want to have debates, it's by Steve Hassan. If you want to have debates by and with theists, and if you want to reach theists where they are, it's important to understand that there's another book too called Freedom of Mind by him. These two books are amazing, and they talk about like some of the ways that you can reach people in a cult. But I think also it's important to remember that if, like, for example, people often like to say, well, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that kind of saying. Well, here's the thing. I was born Amish. I have Amish genetics. I have genetic conditions due to this and that. I was actually born with a congenital genetic condition, just so you know. But regardless, that part of me, if I sit here and I condemn the entirety of Amish culture, then am I condemning that part of me?
Right.
Am I divesting myself of like things that maybe are in the culture that I could benefit from? Or um, where do we as people show people how we can still like be who we are and not necessarily be believers, but rather foster a sense of curiosity, foster a sense of like acceptance. Like sometimes you have to accept that I'm not going to reach that person. Like there was a person who recently said some stuff about 99.9% of Amish are not like that. Can you show me your research data that shows that? And I guarantee you he can't. You know why? Because it doesn't exist. There is no research data that shows that. But I have to accept that this person, more than likely, I will never reach this person. But when we ask questions, when we try to understand where they're coming from, and we try to foster a sense of like, curiosity versus like attacking people for their beliefs, it tends to have better outcomes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because we can't sit there and condemn people and tell them they're wrong for being that, because how are we any better than they are at that point?
Right. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems with atheists online, I think. First of all, social media is one of the worst ways to have a conversation, but it's also one of the most accessible ways, which is kind of a double-edged sword. So you can, on the one hand, be kind of a keyboard warrior and have a level of anonymity, but at the same time, you're really wanting to reach people. You end up, though, like you said, you're not just trying to or questioning their belief. You're questioning, both you and Cindy said this, you're questioning their identity. You're questioning, and especially like what you're talking about, you are genetically Amish. It's not like you can stop being Amish.
Right.
And so, trying to go through those things is very difficult.
Right. And I can't sit there and say like, okay, y'all are all bad. All Amish people are bad. I can't say that. You can't say that about any group that you're trying to reach. You really can't. Because here's another thing is the things we tell ourselves matter. And when we sit there and we say that about like cultures that we grew up in, environments that we grew up in a sense, we are literally denying and gaslighting ourselves when we do that. Not even just gaslighting ourselves, when we condemn the culture, when we demonize a culture or community, we are literally doing that very same thing to ourselves.
Right. That's impactful. That's very impactful. I think it's so important for us to highlight, to say over and over and over. It's so important to say that. Wow. I appreciate that, Mary. Deirdre, do you have anything that you would like to add into that discussion?
Yeah, so I do do a lot of the social media. I do a lot of debating and encouraging I try to encourage women to start critically think. I think that the other thing that I've learned, instead of giving someone all the information on how it doesn't make sense, you stick to one small thing. And the other thing that I try to do too is, instead of talking from like an atheistic viewpoint, I try to put myself in that position and use their terminology and way of speaking to them, is really helpful. And then I just give them a small amount of information, challenge this thing. And a lot of times you'll go in circles and circles in it. And eventually you'll get to the point where they realize they're going into circles, and then you explain it again to them, and then it starts making sense. And what that does is it sets up a chain reaction. So I've done that. I've had that situation with a couple people, and then they start coming back with you and they're like, you know what? I thought about what you said, and then I started critically thinking, and they start gaining that experience of critically thinking, realizing that they can discern, they can start using logic and stuff. And then it just, like I said, then they have other questions and they come to you, well, what about this? What do you think about this? What about that? And it sets off, it changes everything. So sometimes when it seems like we're not getting very far, that we're really only focusing on this one small thing and we're going it over and over again, what you are doing is way bigger than you imagine. You are teaching that person that they have the ability to critically think, and that can set off a whole chain reaction. It's just baby steps, basically.
Well, and the other thing is thank you, Deirdre. Like that really is like, it's true. It happens over and over. But in the meantime, the other thing is meeting people where they're at. I just really want people to understand, what do we mean by meeting people where they're at? Like, for example, like for people that come from our communities, and I speak for the Amish communities that I lived in, right? For people that come from many Amish communities, like when they come from those communities, you can't reach them by speaking to them the same way that you would for people that came from, let's say, a Baptist community or a Protestant community, like, because they don't even speak the same English. So you have to be cognizant of the type of religious language that they speak, the type of English that they speak. What do certain words mean? What could be triggering? You have to learn about how to appropriately meet them where they are without condemning them.
Absolutely. This makes me feel like, so you guys know that I work with children who have been physically and sexually abused. We don't go to these children and say to them, why the hell did you allow this? Or why did you report this? Or, we don't do that. We instead we say this a lot, meet them where they are. You use their language. You understand that their mom might have beat them, but they still love their mom. That's their mom.
I think that's
also their
important
identity.
too, is to have compassion and empathy. And that's what I've started doing too when I talk to people is I can tell now from, doing all the research that I did and all of the debates that I do, I can tell within the first minute if someone was extremely indoctrinated. Like you can really tell right off the bat. And just having empathy and compassion for that person, because even though they are doing harm within the religion or they're doing things that are not good, you have to also understand that they do not understand, and to really not come at them as you are more intelligent than them or you're better or anything like that. Just really coming to them where they are and having compassion and empathy. And like I said, it's also really important because I just want to reiterate this, is I see a lot of not all atheists, but a lot of atheists using our terminology and our way of thinking, and they're not going to understand or grasp it. You really, really have to see them at their level. You have to use words and terminology that they use to help them understand.
As an example, I'm writing a book about my Amish life, okay? I'm not going to say to people, I just feel like it's the right time. My statement says, I feel convicted to write this. Why?
Because that's the language that you learned. That was your language.
Exactly.
I hope that that others are feeling the impact of what we're talking about, because this is extremely important. We have a couple questions really quickly. Apostasy asked, what are some of the signs that you can tell that someone is highly indoctrinated?
Yeah. So one thing that I notice is that automatic aggressive or fear response. So when you notice right off the bat when they find out you're an atheist, what, you don't believe in anything, like you can tell right off the bat. The other thing is when they start trying to explain things that make sense to them, they use a lot of words like faith or the Holy Spirit or God in your heart. That is a big thing. Also, there is a coalition, unfortunately, with those that have been extremely religious, indoctrinated, and have had that science denial, that you'll notice when you ask them kind of the fundamental questions, you'll notice that they tend to believe in conspiracies, or they tend to express that there's, they'll say things like, this movie, don't watch this movie is evil, this is witchcraft, or when they don't understand something and it's so different, it questions their belief, they'll say that it's satanic, that sort of thing. Those are big clues with the religious indoctrination. They tie anything that opposes their belief system, because this is what they've been brainwashed to see, is of the devil, is satanic. A lot of times you'll see that I've had a lot of Christians say to me, you're not an atheist, you're a Satanist, because the concept of not believing in God is so beyond them that you must believe in something, that you must be of the devil, you must be satanic to be denying my God. So those are, I think, some of the big signs.
What do you think, Mary?
Everything that Deirdre said, and I'd like to add to that last point and talk about this. One of the big signs is, well, we'll just pray for people, because that's another thought-stopping phrase that is frequently used, is "Bemissimo beatifici." And it's like, this whole thing of like, well, we're not going to expend any energy towards actually having a solution for whatever it is. We're just gonna, put some thoughts out there and maybe have a prayer, and then everything's going to be good. So it's like, because when people say that, when they say we'll just pray for that person, or well, let's pray for that person, or whatever, it's one, allows them to separate themselves from any kind of responsibility or accountability for the issue.
It's submissive a lot of times, and you can tell when they use it that way. It's a indoctrinating response. Is when you say, this is what I believe in, this is what I think, and they say, well, I'll pray for you, God loves you. It's a way of dismissing what you've just said, and making it right by, like, this person is opposing your belief system, and I'm going to pray for it, or I'm going to pray for you, and everything is going to be okay. It'll make that feeling go away because I prayed for this person opposing my beliefs.
Right. Yeah. Cindy, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes. There's also a tendency to not really listen to questions. It seems that when you have someone who is strongly indoctrinated, whatever question you ask, it's like they hear something different. Either it's whatever word you use in a sentence triggered as an auto response, or they just whatever they want to say at the moment, because they don't really listen to you. They wait until you're done to say what they want, because they want to preach. But yeah, very often they don't listen to the real question and what you mean behind the question. They hear a few words and it clicks some auto response, and so they give you that auto response.
Very, very good point.
Yep.
I think another question is, what are the signs of someone being indoctrinated since birth? That's a great one. Is there any difference? I'm curious.
I mean, I don't really know the answer to that question, but I think it's a great question.
Yeah, so there's been studies on that, so I'm going to go ahead and address those. So
Okay.
it does show that when someone has been indoctrinated since birth, that they lack empathy, and they'll use responses like when suffering or things that have been going on are mentioned to them, their salvation and suffering is a lot that they'll use. It's going to be okay because this life is short and we're going to be in heaven, that sort of thing. And they also have a tendency, well, they don't have a tendency, they do think in very black and white. And I think that's where, when you start discussing things that are kind of in the gray area, that they have a hard time comprehending them because they can only think in black and white. And it's been shown, there's been studies that shows that it does damage to the frontal lobe. And so some of that, with that, you'll see a lot of reasoning skills are greatly diminished. And then, yeah, so I think those would be some of the big signs of someone that's been indoctrinated since birth.
So, are you saying, Deirdre, that there's research that actually shows that the people that respond to, when I ask them and I explain to them that, I experienced severe torturing and trauma as a child for over a decade, and abuse of all sorts, and I asked them where their God was, um, the response often is, well, God cares, God loves you, God cares about you, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah,
But
because they
that's
are
a
taught since
sign.
birth. I mean, those questions have been given to them, answers have been given to them over and over and over again to explain the suffering, to make sense in their indoctrination. So they believe that even though the suffering is great in this life, that it doesn't really matter because this life is short and you're going to go to heaven anywhere. Anyways, you're going to get this reward. So your suffering is very small in comparison to the life that you're going to have afterwards, because it's going to be eternity. And like I said, they also believe that God gives us things to bring him to him. So they believe that you've experienced this trauma because eventually you're going to be led to God, that's what his plan is. And if you're not led to God, your suffering is so that others can be led to God.
Very good. I'm curious. One thing that I've seen with the religious around me is this inability to see their what their actions actually are. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of very hypercritical people while they claim that they are the opposite. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Like they will say, I am a compassionate, caring, loving person, but they will focus on everyone's faults and kind of talk about that behind that person's back.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because you have to think about, if you've ever read the Bible. So if you're told that God is love, and then you read the Bible and you see mass genocide and slavery and that sort of thing, your example of love is not actually what love is. That's the problem, is because if you, especially in the Old Testament, that does not show a loving God. That does not show a loving person. That shows that if you do something that is immoral or against the religion, that you should be punished, essentially. But they believe that because, and they use the excuse because Jesus died for us, that they have compassion because Jesus showed us compassion. Their concept of empathy is seriously diluted. Like, they don't actually have empathy, but they believe that they do. They believe that they have compassion because their big goal is heaven. And so they believe that as long as they're trying to help you lead to heaven, that they have compassion.
Right.
It-
That sounds just like the kids who have been abused. Their definition or their idea of love or empathy or care is completely skewed. It's not their fault. It's that that's what they were taught that it is.
Right.
And that's kind of what it sounds like. And I'm sorry, Cindy, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's not just empathy; it's also the entire morality. Because when you listen to call-in shows about religion, the number of people who try to defend slavery just because it's in the Bible is quite amazing. And it's not just slavery, but everything that's wrong in the Bible is defended by people in some way. And so it means that people claim that their God is the source of morality, but anything he does, whether it's objectively wrong or not, is still good because that's what he does. And so that shifts the entire moral compass for those people, because they will be much more able to find excuses to bad behavior because they already do it for their God.
Right, right. We have some more questions, but really quickly, I wanted to get to some of the articles that Deirdre had shared because I want to make sure that we have time for that. So, Deirdre, can you talk to us a little bit about the article about religious indoctrination of children that was by Jerry Coyne?
Yes. So he did a deep, let me bring up the article so I can reference this. Just one second. I've done a lot of research, so I have a lot of different things.
With that, like, while she's looking for that, I just want to say, like, the people that think that suffering for Jesus is a privilege, or that being born into a specific church is a privilege, like, that's also part of the indoctrination process. When you experience CSA, for example, and somebody responds with, like, God has given you extra things to carry in your life and just be glad it's in this life. Like, those are all, like, signs that indicate, like, this person probably was indoctrinated from birth.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I can. This is so interesting to me to hear such a close parallel with child abuse and child religious indoctrination, which makes me feel like they are kind of one and the same.
Yeah, and I do want to add on that. I want to read an excerpt, or I want to read a part of his thoughts on this that kind of talk into what children are taught about suffering. So I'm just going to read this really quick. In theory, maybe the children need to suffer. Adults might perhaps keep their beliefs to themselves and not make any active attempt to pass them on, but we know, I'm sure, better than to expect that. This kind of self-restraint is simply not in the nature of a parent-child relationship. If a mother, for example, sincerely believes that eating pork is a sin, or that the best cure for depression is holding a crystal to her head, or that after she dies she will be reincarnated as a mongoose, and he's kind of making a joke of this kind of, but it's showing like the severity of it, or that Capricorns and Aries are bound to quarrel, she is hardly likely to withhold such serious matters from her own offspring. But more important, he explains so well, this kind of self-restraint is not in the nature of successful belief systems. Belief systems in general flourish or die out accordingly, but they're solely reliant on the indoctrination. When a child is taught, just a second, sorry about that. When a child is, I still have a hard time reading with my brain injury. I'm so sorry about that.
No, don't
the
even
words
apologize.
get kind of jumbled together, but basically what he's trying to convey is that that when you're doing these things, like these certain sort of rituals and that sort of stuff, when bad things happen to you, that justifies the suffering, is what he's talking about. So when something horrible happens, you pray, or you do this, or you do that, and it justifies the suffering. And so a lot of children that have experienced abuse and different things when they're religiously indoctrinated do not even recognize that they've been abused.
I didn't
wow.
know that I was being abused until somebody told me I was.
Right. And unfortunately, we see that with a lot of abuse, even horrific abuse. It's just they don't have the same. We often say that some of these kids don't have the same experiences to differentiate, because if all you've known is one way, you don't know that it's the wrong way because you haven't experienced anything else, and you don't have. Often you are isolated, so you don't even see other people who have a different lived experience. And you see that with indoctrination, with the religious indoctrination as well, because you often hear that they should not hang out with kids that are not like-minded, because they will pull you into sin and pull you closer to Satan and that sort of thing. So it's kind of the same thing in my opinion.
Yeah, and when you
Yeah.
get and you see those adults, like when they, like I said, they grow up, that are extremely religiously indoctrinated. They have been taught that anything outside of their belief system, that your sole purpose on life is you've been influenced by the devil, and your sole purpose is to take them away from their salvation. They believe that anything that opposes that, you are to take them away from their end goal.
Oh. So this kind of leads greatly into a question from the audience. Deneen Murphy asks, if an adult deconstructs and their children are young but have been indoctrinated, how do they deconstruct them?
So I kind of experienced that some with my son. My daughter did not experience indoctrination. My son had some views of indoctrination. And one thing that I thought with him is you just start introducing critically thinking. So I found that, like, when we were talking about, like, you can do it in normal life. Like, let's say we're at a stop sign and the light is red. Explain to him why the light is red. The light is red to stop traffic so the other traffic can go, and so that the cars don't hit the other cars. And that's why we have this. And just explaining life and everything to them, give them a reason behind everything. This is why we do this. And then give them that logical thing, and then start encouraging them to start using those critical thinking. Ask them questions, why do we do this? Why do you think this happens? And that sort of thing. But really encouraging that critically thinking will really help deconstruct, because that's basically, if you hear anybody, like any adults that talk about their deconstruction process, their deconstruction start at when they realize they have the ability to start questioning things and using logic to determine whether or not this set of beliefs was true. They start learning the ability to critically think.
Mary, do you want to add anything to that?
I just would agree with that. I think that learning the ability to critically think, the other thing is you can also encourage people to make decisions, because a lot of time people, both in abusive situations or in religious communities, have not ever fully made decisions for themselves. So when you start fostering and empowering them to make decisions for themselves, and actually, once they're thinking about, like, why am I making this decision? Am I making this decision to go to church on Sunday? And this is just an example, to go to church on Sunday because my family said, when I was growing up, I grew up in a home where they said that if I didn't go to church on Sunday, I was going to burn forever and ever and ever. Like, there's eternal fire and brimstone and all of that. So am I going to church because my family said that, or am I going to church because I want to go to church and because I feel that I get something from going to church? Why are you going to church?
Right. Cindy?
Yeah, another thing that's important to teach is that everyone can make mistakes. Adults can be wrong. Everyone can be wrong. So if you have a doubt on anything, check, ask questions about it, because we are born wired to obey our parents, because in nature, kids who don't, and I speak not just about humans but all animals, if you don't listen to your parents, then you're more likely to die. So you have this wiring that teaches us that we have to listen and believe to our parents, but that's not relevant to us anymore, except in the very first years. But other than that, no, there is no one who has all the knowledge, and we should question people. In fact, the more certain they are, the more you should question them, unless they can prove you that what they say is true.
Right. Oh, excellent point. Thank you so much. Another question from the audience, from Kathy Humanist. Have you noticed that quite a few indoctrinated people seem to believe in ghosts?
Yes.
Well,
Yeah,
Well,
and
they go
depending on
on
what they,
conspiracy theories too.
yeah, so a lot of it depends on kind of, you can kind of tell like how they believe in ghosts too, what they believe ghosts are. You can kind of tell by that belief how indoctrinated they are, because a lot of really severely indoctrinated people will believe that ghosts are actually demons. Um, and yes, I have not met a person that has been religiously indoctrinated. Every single one that I've met believes in some sort of supernatural being, whether it be demons or ghosts or that sort of thing, and they believe that you can be influenced or possessed. That they also believe that if you are watching TV, certain movies, listening to certain music, etc., that is going to open you up to being influenced. Yeah, and that's also goes into the whole denial of like, don't get involved with the outside world, because these bad things are going to happen to you. But yeah, I definitely believe. I've also noticed a lot of people that haven't completely deconstructed in their in Christianity specifically, but they're starting to see some really bad things of it, and they start stepping out of that. They will go from being what they call religious, in quotations, to spiritual. So they will think that they're spiritual, even though they're still religious, and they will start kind of going into the ghosts and that sort of thing. It's kind of, and a lot of times, the next step in kind of getting out of that. It's like they can't quite step out of that deconstruction, so they kind of step into what they believe is spiritual now.
Yes. So Mary, do you want to add? I like it. She put something in our private chat saying, rolls eyes out loud. And I thought that was beautiful. Can you explain?
So quite frequently when people leave Amish churches, they go to Mennonite churches. They go to other born again churches. They become very fervent and they carry some of those Amish beliefs with them. And so you have people from a wide variety of churches that may even have been out for like 2 generations that may still be indoctrinated to believe certain Amish things. Whether they realize it or not is a whole other story. With that being said, like I've actually had like second and third y'all, my Amish is here today to stay apparently. Generations of like Amish people who have come to me to ask me for information because they're trying to figure out why they believe this, and it turns out it's actually an Amish belief that even when their grandparents went in and joined the Mennonites, and then their parents actually didn't like go to church, or they maybe joined the little more liberal church, right? Like not a Mennonite or an Anabaptist church, they still carried on and passed on that part of the Amish indoctrination. And so now they are adults and they are having to deconstruct this generations of Amish indoctrination.
Wow.
Further, there is actually a guy who, I have screenshots of him saying this. He says that PTSD is actually just being possessed by a demon, and we just need to cast out the demon. So that's also an indicator that somebody has really suffered from indoctrination, by the way.
Yeah,
Um,
I've actually, I have been anointed with oil, prayed over, so many times. Later, I found out that I was autistic, but as a child, I was different. I got overstimulated. I showed some strong autistic symptoms, and my community and my parents denied it as being so. And I mean, as an adult, like until like even when I started deconstructing, I believe that there was something wrong with me that almost shameful that I had to hide from people. I can't let them know like how I really am. Like I'm truly a bad person. And I had guilt in that, and later found out that there wasn't, and I wasn't a bad person. I was autistic, but because I was believed so severely that it was a demonic influence. Even like I said, when I deconstructed myself, I still had some sort of like guilt and shame about myself.
that's so important to highlight. Even in Christian, mainstream Christian religions, it's very much that way. You look at Pastor Greg Locke, who is up on that stage under his tent, and he's screaming how ADHD and ADD is nothing more than demons taking over your kids, and what you really need to do is have people gather around and get that demon spirit out of them, and that's so dangerous. They also talk about that with depression and bipolar and serious things that require professional interventions and possibly medications or therapies.
And it puts such a shame and guilt on children. Like I can't tell you, like I can't put into words how awful I felt about myself. Like I getting emotional about it, but even now I have to push those thoughts away. Like I'm still like think so bad about myself and so self-conscious because I was told that the way I'm acting, every core of my being, there was something wrong. I was demonic. I had a demonic influence, and that shame that puts on you is horrendous.
Right. We are getting close to an hour. If you guys have a little bit more time, there's a couple more things that I think are really important to talk about. Is it okay if we go a little longer, or do you guys have a hard stop?
I'm okay with that.
I'm okay too.
As long as it's not more than 15 minutes.
Okay, then I will hurry, I promise, because we have another question from the audience that I feel is extremely important.
Before we go there, can I share something really quick
Oh,
that goes
absolutely.
along with the demonizing? Not only the demonizing, another thing that I've noticed that people who are indoctrinated gravitate towards is like faith healers. They gravitate towards naturopathic practitioners. So like for example, so I too am autistic, and like Deirdre said, there are no words to describe what I experienced there. But regardless, one of the big things that I experienced was being taken to a community several states away to an Amish doctor with an 8th grade education, who then proceeded to prescribe certain herbal medications and whatever, or I don't even know, like tinctures, whatever. I do know what one thing was. Several things were called that were given to me because I wet my bed, and that is often an indicator of child abuse happening. For people that don't know, that is, bedwetting can really be an indicator of something wrong medically or child abuse. Regardless, they take me to an Amish doctor, again with an 8th grade education, that had no science or even like anatomy and physiology, who then they put me on these things. My mom takes me home. She has this like let me just be real blunt here. She had this fucking nail clipper on a little chain, and she would have me hold out my hand and put these herbs and tinctures and whatever on my hand, and then if it went clockwise as she held this nail clipper over it, then I was supposed to take that medication because it was indicating that there was a deficiency in my body. Further, one of those things that she gave me, I passed out multiple times as an Amish child. And that specific thing that she gave me, there's research in the National Institution of Medical, I can't think of the word, but there's research that actually talks about the side effects of that specific herb is actually dizziness, stomach gastrointestinal things, and I had all of those, and nobody would give me any form of appropriate help. And people that are indoctrinated tend to go to healing things like that. They'll go and do, like, for example, for autistic parents, they will sit there and they will demand that the autism must be fixed. There's this idea that their autistic children are just, they have to be fixed. And so then they fall into this trap of, like, I'm going to try everything under the sun, including, like, for example, foot baths with electro stimulation and salt, because that's going to cure autism, even though there's no science or research that shows that. But I'm just saying, they fall for things like that.
And it's so
Thank you.
harmful. I'm so sorry you went through that, Mary. That's awful. And like I said, it is so, like, I still, like, look back at how I was treated and what they thought of me, and all of the, like, praying and the anointing. They used to put oil on my, like, everywhere on my forehead, my door frame, and then all of this stuff, and the shame that I felt. Like, I cannot even tell you. Like, it is an awful feeling. When I think back in it, I get angry and I get emotional, because I really, really thought I was inherently wrong. And that's what's so dangerous about that, is when you believe that this is demon possession or demonic influence, your praying isn't going to cure that. And so the result of that is going to be that person thinking that they are horrible. And I always felt like I was that, like, I can't let people know how bad I am. If they know, like, who I truly am, they're not going to like me. I have to hide this.
I want to say that none of that was okay for either of you. I just want to say that out loud. And I want to say how completely sorry I am that you guys went through this, and that any child or children are going through this. It's not right. And it's
not okay.
It's
really
not.
not. And I also want to add this one. The other thing that they add to the demon one is, like, you just don't have enough faith. You don't pray enough. You're just not really worshiping God enough. You're not pious enough. Like, there's this whole, like, you're just never up to snuff. You're never enough. You're never worthy enough to actually be worthy of, like, maybe love that isn't violence. Like, that's a novel concept.
Absolutely. This kind of, I think it goes into this important question. Now, it was talking earlier, it came up when we were talking about deconverting and so forth. But I think it's also very relevant to what we're talking about now. So Apostasy asked, if there's damage to the frontal lobe, as we had talked about earlier, are there ways to repair it? I'm genuinely wondering, because you just described me in both of those replies pre-deconverting. Again, the replies earlier when we were talking about this.
Yes.
So there unfortunately, I mean, there's ways to get past some of that damage. There isn't, like, it's not hopeless. There's ways that I know that it's very similar to kind of what addicts go through, like DBT, meditation, that sort of stuff can help. And therapy can help. I unfortunately, I mean, once that damage is done, there's no way to reverse that. That's the unfortunate part. But there's ways to get through those symptoms, and to get through that, if that makes sense.
So I'd like to add to that that there's actually a whole slew of like treatment, because it's when you live with PTSD, there's various treatments. Like for example, I've had EMDR therapy, which really helped me process some of the and be able to look at things in maybe a little different way. So it's not necessarily that it will ever be as if this didn't happen. I was 19 years old when my therapist sat me down and said, I've done everything that I can for you. This is the best that it's going to get, possibly. I'm not saying that it can't get better, but I'm saying that as far as like managing the trauma, I've taught you everything that I know. And I went on to a different therapist. I still have a therapist, for the record, but there is a way forward where you can find the glimmers. And I don't know if you're familiar with that term. If not, please go Google it. It's the good things. Like, for example, let me tell you about a glimmer that I have. So one of the things that I talk about at this time of the year is I have a really hard time sometimes with around the holidays. It can get really depressing. But one of the glimmers is when I'm able to get together with like people in real life, and we have a candy making day, because that to me was something that I did with people that I really really loved and cared for and still care for. And I just really feel like I am honoring that glimmer of hope that I had, because the making of candy together, the having the time with each other, doing something meaningful. You can still have a meaningful life after that, but it takes a lot of hard work. And you have to be committed to doing the hard work. And you have to be truthful about what you are experiencing. And when you go to a therapist, if you're unwilling to actually work through the things, therapy is not going to help you. You have to be ready to do the work in order to seek therapy in the first place. And you have to be able to trust your therapist. I do highly recommend finding a secular therapist as opposed to a religious counselor, because quite frankly, often religious counselors are not necessarily even licensed. Let's talk about blistering soap, okay? And this is a plain run. And when I say plain, means it's run by conservative Anabaptists, and there's a variety of different people involved. However, comma pause, they consider it a rehabilitation facility. Sometimes they will send sex offenders, and they will send the victims of sex offenders to the same facilities. These people running this, typically they may be like the people providing services. They have, again, an 8th grade education. They don't have access to the information or knowledge that they need in order to help you. So if you're going to seek out support, find somebody who is actually qualified to provide support for you. Find somebody that you feel like, I can get to know this person and feel safe disclosing my deepest, darkest secrets to them.
Absolutely. There's also the Secular Therapy Project, which is an awesome resource to find a secular, very specific secular therapist. I also want to say, from what I've learned in working with trauma victims, is that it depends more on when the intervention takes place, because the younger the intervention, the better chance of being able to reverse damage before it gets to the point where it can't be reversed. Just as when you see animals in the forest, they always take the route of least resistance, and then it makes like a little path in the forest that's kind of beaten down. That's the same thing with your neurons in your brain. You can refocus that and make it a different path, that's a path of healthy versus a path of trauma. And Mary, you highlighted EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, which is an evidence-based trauma therapy. It's fantastic. It is so good. And I mean, I can't even tell you, it's a gold standard. And it's also, I don't know, this isn't quite the right word, but I say it's less invasive. And what I mean by that is that it's easier to go through, and yet it's so incredibly impactful. Another one, oh, go ahead.
And the other thing is like EMDR though can take a lot out of you.
Mm-hmm.
It really can. It's a lot. But there's
Yeah.
other therapies too. And there's also, like, if you're doing EMDR, you might need medication for
Mhm.
support so that you can survive that too. And that's okay too. I just
Right.
want
And
to
it,
mention medications really quickly because sometimes people really need medications to help them.
right. And it's not that the EMDR itself is so difficult. It well kind of triggers it. It opens up parts in your brain that you need to deal with. So you focus on something and it
Hmm.
helps you to kind of deal with it in a safe place so that it can again reprocess how your brain handles that, and it's not so much of a trigger, but it takes time. And every time that you do that, you feel very drained. I mean, you even need to drink a lot of water. I mean, it
Uh-huh.
does a physiological thing to your body. Another one is TFCBT, which is trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and that one is superb. It's also a gold standard evidence-based therapy, so I would recommend those. I want to just say that while I had an opportunity to.
Hmm.
And so before we end this, because I know we're getting close, before we end this, Deirdre, we had started the conversation by saying what is child indoctrination and what is not child indoctrination. I think we've spent a good amount of time talking about what it is. And I wanted to quickly touch on what it isn't, because I think there is a misconception out there. And I also think that people kind of use these terms so much that they kind of lose their true
It's
meaning.
been
And I
used
want to touch on
in
that.
politics a lot,
Mhm.
and kind of agendas, and I want to introducing telling a child a set of information, whether you agree with that information or not, giving them information that's not indoctrination. Indoctrination is a whole process. So just because maybe a child has been exposed to something, whether it be, I'm just going to say it, drag queen shows is not a form of indoctrination. Going to a show, that is not indoctrination. That may be something that's opposed to your beliefs. That may be something that's going to gather questions, but indoctrination is a whole process. So for a drag queen to be indoctrination, you would have to tell them that this drag queen is reality, and deny the outside world, and expose them over and over and over and over again, and tell them that this is your world, and if you don't believe in this drag queen show, that there's going to be consequences. And that simply does not happen. Teaching children pronouns and stuff like that, that's not indoctrination. That's giving information. Science is not indoctrination. Also, it is because science is the opposite of indoctrination, because the scientific method breaks down information in a logical way. And so you cannot indoctrinate with those set of beliefs. Again, I just want to again reiterate that indoctrination is a whole process. Like, you have to make that their whole entire world, and there's consequences for not believing in what you're telling them, and then there's rewards for believing in that and denying anything outside of that. So this term indoctrination is used very incorrectly. It is not what indoctrination is. Even if it was something that you thought was wrong that is being told to your child, even your child receiving that information one time or several times, that's not what indoctrination is.
Absolutely. I want to thank you guys for coming on. This is so good. I wish we could go on longer. I do want to give Cindy a chance, because I feel like Cindy's been sitting there patiently waiting to be able to say something on all these topics. So, Cindy, would you like to speak?
Now, just to come back on what Deirdre was saying about science, science is also self-correcting, while indoctrination is presenting one view and denying all the other ones. So there is no correction possible. So that's quite important in my opinion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that we have touched on so many extremely valuable aspects of both child indoctrination and and those things that are not child indoctrination. I'd like to give each of you a chance to give your final comments before we close out the show. We'll start with Deirdre.
Yeah, well, first of all, I really appreciate you letting me on here. I'm sorry about some of the blabbering I did. I am recovering from brain surgery, so I'm doing my best on that. I just want to encourage everybody that to use critically thinking, to realize that especially as women, that we are more intelligent and capable than we realize. That just because someone tells you something is true, you don't have to believe that. You have the right to question it, and to learn your own truth. That our brains and our minds are so capable, and you are so much more powerful than you realize.
I love that. I love that. Just got goosebumps. Thank you so much, Deirdre. Mary?
Well, I'd also like to add that, gay people being around and trans people being allowed to participate in sports, those things are also not indoctrination. And I would echo what Deirdre said, but I'd also say this is like every human being is worthy of human rights. We all deserve human rights. Children deserve human rights. And I'd ask yourselves to take a long, hard look at your actions. What do your actions support? Are you part of the problem or part of the solution?
Yes. Oh, I love you guys so much.
We love you too.
Love you right back.
You. Cindy, what are your final comments?
Yeah, I would remind people that a parent's role is not to make your child a duplicate of you, of what you want it to be. It's to help them become who they actually are.
Love it,
Yes.
Cindy. Yes.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Oh my gosh, you guys are fantastic.
So are you.
Well, I think what we're seeing right here is a bunch of women who truly do care about making the world a better place instead of just talking about what's wrong with things. If you're, if you're always against something, but you're not for something, you might want to check yourself a little bit. So for the rest of you, I want to thank you so much for joining us and for the great questions that really helped to blossom this wonderful conversation. Again, if you feel like you need some help, there is Recovering from Religion. There's also the Secular Therapy Project. Please reach out. That's one of the hardest things that I see with religious indoctrination is that you're not supposed to reach out. And I want to tell you that it's extremely important to reach out. If you want us to continue doing shows like this, remember to help us out by liking, subscribing, sharing, hit the bell, all of those things. And if you want to do a little bit more, join our Patreon. And our Patreon has a lot of special perks. Like you can come on to the show with us and ask a question on our chat. on our show. We also have super chats and we will pull those up just as quick as they come in. I want to thank our current patrons, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Bryce, Cornell, Deborah Grace, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, and myself. Let me make sure I have not missed anyone. Michael Wiseman. I almost forgot. I thought I was missing someone. I'm sorry about that. I want to thank our producers, Wes, Phil, and Kat, and our booking team. Remember that we have other shows like The Sunny Spot, my show on Mondays. We have The Secular Soapbox, and we have Global Atheist, and Cindy is a part of that one. So please check out all of our other shows. And we have The Bible Says What with Michael Wiseman. In the meantime, as you guys are going about your week, remember to always think critically. Good night, everybody.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement.
Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that, spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas, think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past and the pettiness, a reflection of the